Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Janmadhyasya Yato Anvayaditaratascha Artheshu Abhignaswarat Tene Brahmahridaya Adikavaye Muhyanti Yat Surayah Tejo Vari Mridam Yatha Vinimayo Yatra Trisargo Mrisha Dhamna Svena Sada Nirastakohakam Satyam Param Dhimahi Nigamakalpataror Galitam Phalam Shukamukadamrutadrava Sanyutam Pibata Bhagavatam Rasamalayam Muhuraho Rasika Bhuvi Bhavukaha. We now enter the 22nd chapter of the 8th Skandha of Srimad Bhagavatam. We are in the middle of the wonderful Vamana avatar of Bhagavan, expanding as Trivikrama. So we saw, after being offered 3 strides, Bhagavan took 2 strides to cover all of earth and heaven and all the celestial regions, with not an atom left for the 3rd stride. So he, as a pastime, chastised Bali by saying, "You have failed your word by not being able to offer anything for the 3rd stride, and therefore you will be consigned to the subterranean regions." And he is bound by Garuda with cords. So now we continue. Shuka Brahma Rishi says, even though he was criticized or chastised by the Lord, he remained unagitated and he gave a very calm reply with a very calm, composed mind. Here it says Bali is described as Bhidyamano api abhinnatma. Even though he was chastised, he remained without any agitation. So, this is the highest sign of one who is truly surrendered to the Lord. So, the Lord tests him here. As we already mentioned, this is a pastime where apparently the Lord is acting unfairly towards him because he has offered everything that he could. He went against the word of his own Guru, and knowing full well that it is Vishnu who has come in the guise of a small dwarf boy, he kept his word, and sure enough, Bhagavan took the gigantic infinite proportion and measured everything with 2 strides, and Bali literally had nothing to offer, and yet Bhagavan chastises him, all to bring out the glory. So we see the quality of a true surrendered devotee, a true Bhagavata. That is why Bali is called a Mahabhagavata or a Mahajan, along with the likes of Prahlada and Janaka and so on, because through this wonderful pastime, Bhagavan brings out the quality of who a Mahajan is, how great Bali is, because he remains unagitated completely, even though he is put to the severest of tests. We cannot even withstand a small test and we lose our faith in God. We question Him, we question why it's happening to me, we complain, we run away, and so on. Whereas Bali here put to the most severe test where he has to lose literally everything, and that too from the position of being the ruler of the whole universe. So it is one thing to lose a small amount of property. Bali was the emperor of earth and heaven. He had under his dominion the whole created universe, as it were. And from that, in one instant, it was all taken away from him, and he gave it all away willingly. And even after giving it all willingly, far from praising him, he was criticized for not keeping his word and giving the 3rd stride. So, this is the severest of test a devotee is put through, and hardly anyone, even in that position, or in much lighter position, even in a much smaller test, would be able to remain unagitated. But here Bali, it is said, remains unagitated, and he says very calmly to the Lord, O Bhagavan, O illustrious one, O Uttama Shloka, he said, I do not want to make my vow untrue in any way, so I will do whatever I can to justify it, because I do not want to deceive you. Therefore, let me make this offer. Please place your 3rd stride right on top of my head. So this is the glorious offer of self-surrender by Bali. When we spoke of the 9 ways of devotion that Prahlad spoke about, the last was Atma Nivedan, which is surrendering oneself completely, and Bali is given as the example for that. It is because of this very sentence that Bali speaks. He says, Karomi ritam tanna bhavet pralambhanam padam tritiyam kuru shirshna me nijam. He says, place the third step right on my head and take me. He said, you have taken all of earth, you have taken all of heaven. Now I am the possessor of all of them. I was the king of all of them. And therefore, taking me, having taken all the possession, now take the possessor too, because that is all I have to offer. I have nothing else to offer. All my possessions are gone. So the possessor that I am, take me as the third step. So this is the greatest offer of self-surrender done by Bali, for which he is eternally glorified. So he says, continues, he says, I am not afraid of going to hell. I'm not afraid of losing all my property. I'm not afraid of any calamity. The only thing I do not want is to be called as untruthful. Because he says, it is a great blessing that you have inflicted through this punishment, and I do not want to make this untrue by somehow escaping out of this. I want to make it true because this punishment I see is actually a blessing, because it is only giving me freedom from all these possessions and all these burdens so that I can be completely surrendered to you. He says, you have always been a great benefactor to all of us. You have always chastised those who have taken demoniacal ways so that they can get the correct vision. And here also you are doing the same thing, and therefore to have exclusive devotion to you is my only purpose. He says, Pumsam shlagyatamam manye dandam arhatam arpitam. He says, I consider your punishment to be a blessing. And then, therefore, he says, Tvam nunam asuranam naf paroksha paramo guruhu. He says, even for all the demons, you are the supreme guru, because you, even in your chastisement, show the right way to correct us, to give us the right vision so that we can actually surrender unto you. And therefore, he says, I do not feel in any way disturbed by the fact that I have been made a prisoner, I have been bound with cords, because I am, after all, the grandson of my great grandfather Prahlada, who is esteemed by all your devotees and whose reputation is the highest, because he did not even flinch when he had to be subject to all the various tortures by his own father Hiranyakashipu. So here an important point we can see is the greatness of both Prahlada and his grandson Bali. Prahlada went against his very father in order to surrender to Bhagavan, and Bali went against his very guru in order to surrender to Bhagavan. Both of them put the highest order principle of surrendering to Bhagavan above what is considered a very high principle, which is the position of father in the case of Prahlad for Hiranyakashipu, and the position of guru in the case of Bali for Shukracharya. So Bali, following the example of his grandfather, discarded his own guru to surrender to Bhagavan. So here Bali says, my grandfather Prahlad taught me by showing the way, by remaining undisturbed when subject to all kinds of tortures by his father, because he thought to himself, what purpose can be served with the body which will only abandon one upon death? What purpose is served by the so-called relatives who are nothing but robbers, who are interested only in our wealth? What purpose is even served by one's own spouse, who is only interested in increasing bondage? What purpose is served by all the properties? Because all of these, having attachment for them, is the root of misery, is the root of suffering, and it's a waste of one's lifetime. He says, this is Prahlad, Bali quoting Prahlad. Bali says, Prahlad thought, Kim Atmana Anena Jahati yo Antatah, Kim Riktaharaihi Swajanakya Dasyubhihi, Kim Jayaya Samsriti Hetu Bhutaya, Martyasya Gehaihi Kim iha ayusho vyayaha. So he says Prahlad also thought, when he was subject to all these tortures for his body and for all his possessions, he thought, what is the use of being attached to the body? What is the use of being attached to one's own relatives? What is the use of being attached to family, spouse, houses, and so on? Because all of these are simply a waste of time and only increase bondage. And this is why Shankara Bhagavat Pada also says in Bhajagovindam, Putrat api dhana bhajam bhitihi. He says, when one has wealth, all his relations are simply a source of fear. They are only manipulating to get his wealth. They are only increasing bondage. Nobody is interested in the true welfare. The one who is interested in the true welfare is alone a true well-wisher, be it the guru, be it a friend, be it one's relative. If one is truly directing one, guiding one towards Bhagavan, then that person is the true well-wisher. Everyone else is only there for attachment. So Prahlad, thinking this way, he was able to walk away from all his attachment, and with deep wisdom and virtue, he took shelter in your lotus feet. So Bali is addressing Bhagavan saying, this was the thinking of Prahlad, that all of these attachments were futile. There was no use in being attached to them, and therefore he surrendered to you completely with no fear. And similarly, being guided by Prahlad, my grandfather, that is my great Prahlad, who is my grandfather, because his great grandfather is actually Hiranyakashipu, who is the demon, but his grandfather is great, who is Prahlad. And therefore, he says, Prahlad, being my guide, my guru, he says, even though you are here posing as my enemy, even though you have robbed all my fortune, I know that you are here only to bestow your grace, and therefore I am willing to completely surrender to you, because he says only a man whose understanding has been rendered ignorant because of his attachment to wealth does not recognize that this life is always temporary. So, the one who is ignorant, is attached to this life, he is attached to the body, he doesn't recognize that this life is temporary, and therefore he is the one who is concerned, agitated, disturbed when his possessions are taken away, whereas I am guided by my grandfather Prahlad, and therefore I am not disturbed. He says, Ataham api atma ripos twantikam daivena nita prasavah tyajita shri idam kritantita kavarti jivitam yaya dhruvam stamba martina buddhyate. He says that I have been brought to your presence by a great fortune. This is considered my great fortune, that even though you are posing as my enemy, it is a great blessing, benediction, fortune for me that you have come here and you are taking away all my possessions, because only one who is deluded will be attached to his possessions and not recognize the blessing that is in front of one when Bhagavan comes. So when he was speaking thus, it is said that Prahlad, the great devotee, his grandfather, appeared there. So as we saw, Prahlad blessed Bali even before, and now Prahlad has appeared again, hearing of all these incidents and to get darshan of his beloved Lord. So Prahlad looks so beautiful, graceful, with lotus eyes, and as soon as he is there, Bali bows down. So he could not even offer proper worship because he is bound with cords, but he bent his head low and he had tears in his eyes, and he was completely bowing down with both affection as well as feeling sad that he was in this position, and he thought Prahlad, his grandfather, might think of him wrongly for being bound in cords like a prisoner in front of Bhagavan. But Prahlad, of course, has divine vision, so he sees the Lord there standing in front, and Bali there bowing down, and Prahlad falls down on the ground, offers his worship to Bhagavan, and then Prahlad says, addressing Bhagavan, it was you alone who bestowed this position to Bali, and now you have taken it away. And therefore, whatever you do is good for him. So he says beautifully, whatever you gave, you are taking it away. When you gave it also, it's good. And when you are taking it away, it's good, because everything is as ordained by you. That is why it is said, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. So that's what Prahlad says. You gave and you are taking it away, and both are good. It's a great favor done to him right now, in that he is deprived of his fortune, because this fortune only infatuates the soul. He says, Manye mahanasya kruto hi anugraho vibramshito yat shriya atma mohanat. He says, this is anugraha, this is grace to deprive one of one's possessions that you are doing now to Bali, my grandson, because otherwise it can delude even a very advanced being, all this wealth and fame and fortune. And therefore he says, who can truly perceive the essential nature of one's own being despite having such wealth, because such wealth causes even the learned and the most self-controlled man to fall a prey to delusion. So he says there are many examples of this. Even the most self-controlled one, when offered the temptation of wealth or other pleasures, they fall down from their position. So Prahlad says, Yayahi vidvanapi muhyate yatastat ko vichaste gatim atmano yatha. So even the great vidwan, the great learned being, the great apparently self-controlled one, he falls down when he is tempted with all these possessions and fortune and fame. And therefore it is only a great blessing you have offered to my grandson by taking it away. And therefore he offers his obeisances. He says, Tasmai namaste jagadishvaraya vai narayanaya akhila loka sakshine. Prahlad always offers such beautiful prayers. He says, I offer my obeisance to the Lord of the universe, Narayana, the witness of the entire world. So Prahlad, as we can see, is the kind of relative who is a true blessing. So not all relatives are a source of bondage. If a relative is like Prahlad, then he is a source of blessing. So Prahlad, being his grandfather, was not the least disturbed that his grandson was put in this position, but instead he saw the blessing that his grandson was given through this whole pastime, and therefore he glorified the Lord and thereby deepened the surrender of his own grandson by saying this in front of him. So after this, his wife is there, Vindhyavali. She is also a very evolved soul, as we already saw. She came with a golden pot of water to wash the feet of the Lord when he came. And even after Shukracharya warned, when Bali wanted to continue with the vow, she supported him. So this is the sign of a good wife. So many spouses are always attached to the possessions, whereas Vindhyavali was one who was ready to be a true Sahadharmini, that is, one who is ready to walk with her husband in Dharma without worrying about the consequences. And therefore Vindhyavali also offers a beautiful prayer. She says, after all, O Lord, this universe entirely belongs to you, and this is all created by you for your own Leela, your own Maya, and therefore there is nobody who owns anything here. The sense of ownership and proprietorship is only a false idea in the minds of men. So she says, even my husband, he never owned anything. So she gives a very beautiful understanding here, perspective here, that in this universe, which is only your plaything, your Leela, anyone with only a perverse understanding will consider himself to be the owner or the proprietor. Because the true owner, the true proprietor is only you, who are the creator, preserver, and destroyer of the universe. So what she says here is, not only did you give Bali and you take it away, but also it is always yours. Even when it was given to Bali, apparently, it only belonged to you. And now also it is yours. It was always yours, and it shall always be yours. And therefore there is no question of Bali, my husband, ever being the owner of it. So beautifully she expresses her surrender too. Then Brahma is there and he speaks. It says, Hiranyagarbho Bhagavan Uvacha Madhusudanam. Bhagavan is also called Madhusudana, a beautiful name for Narayana or Krishna. So Hiranyagarbha, which is Brahma, tells Madhusudana, he says, O creator of all beings, O inner controller of all beings, O ruler of all demigods, O cosmic being, he addresses beautifully, Bhuta Bhavana, Bhutesha, Deva Deva, Jaganmaya. O Lord, he says this Bali does not deserve any punishment anymore. So he is now beseeching in favor of Bali, having seen this entire pastime. He says this Bali gifted everything to you. Brahma says he gave whatever he had to you, and now he is offering that which is the most difficult to offer, which is his own self. He is offering to have his head be the third stride of you, and therefore, having given away everything with an undisturbed mind, how can he have suffering anymore? Because Brahma makes this case that this is the example of the highest devotee, and therefore he cannot have any suffering. So please now release him. So now, after this whole pastime is over, after everybody has glorified Bali, and we have seen this entire drama beautifully enacted in order for the true greatness of Bali to come out, now Bhagavan speaks to conclude. He says, O Brahma, not to worry. I take away the fortune of only those on whom I want to bestow my grace. So this is the first thing Bhagavan says. Such a beautiful verse. He says, Brahman, yam anugrhnami tadvisho vidunomyaham. So he says, whoever I want to bestow my grace, the way I bestow my grace is by taking away his possessions. This exact thing is later said by Krishna also in the 10th Skandha. He says, Yasyaham anugrahnami harishyet dhanam shanaihi. Whoever I want to bestow my grace, I take away their wealth. Here also, Bhagavan as Vamana says, when I grace someone, I take away, because he says, Yan madah purushastambo lokam mam cha avamanyate. He says, because if a person has got a lot of wealth and power, he becomes proud and arrogant and forgets me. So this is the truth of the matter, that having worldly success and possession almost always deludes men into thinking that they are the proprietor, owner, and enjoyer, and therefore being removed of that is a grace, is an act of grace, and that's what Bhagavan says. Because he says getting a human state is first of all so rare. Passing through many types of species, one attains the state of a human being, and after having come to a human position, if one gets attached to these properties and position and power, he wastes the whole human life form. Because he says the true symptom of grace is that one does not feel any pride no matter what qualities he has, whether his birth is of high pedigree, whether his actions are great, whether his form is so beautiful, whether he has got great learning and intelligence, whether he's got power, wealth, and affluence. No matter what is there, if there is total absence of pride, that is the symptom of grace. He says, Janma karma vayo rupa vidyair aishwarya dhanadibihi yad yasya na bhavet stambat tatrayam mad anugraha. So that is my grace. When there is no pride in any of this, then that is the sign of true grace. And one who is truly devoted to me does not have any such pride. Now here this Bali, now he addresses about this Bali. Bali had no pride because Bali was able to offer everything without any question. So those who have pride in their wealth and possessions, they resist offering it. They are brought kicking and screaming to the possession of losing their wealth and name and fame and possessions, and after that they recognize it as grace. So that is the difference between many others and Bali. For many others, when suffering comes, when things are taken away, there is resistance. One goes kicking and screaming, protesting it, complaining about God and all the rest. But the ones who are fortunate, even among those who over time recognize it as grace, looking back, they recognize that this whole event that happened when I was actually resisting was actually a benediction to me. Whereas Bali did not resist the least, but even while it was happening, he was completely surrendered, willingly accepting this position, which is why he is a Mahajan. He is so rare. So Bhagavan says, this Bali, he has already conquered my Maya. So this is to be given this certificate by Bhagavan is the highest praise. So Bhagavan says, this Bali has already conquered my Maya, in that even in the greatest distress, he was not the least perplexed. He says, Yesha Danava Daityanam Agranihi Kirtivardhanaha Ajayshida Jayam Mayam Sidan Apina Mohyati. So he was not the least confused even in distress, and therefore he has crossed over my Maya. And therefore he has nothing to worry, because he further says, even though he was impoverished, even though he was stripped of all his wealth, even though he was tied down by cords, even though all his demon enemies or demon army, that is, they all fled, even though he was cursed by his own Guru Shukracharya, none of that could shake the firm resolve of this great being. So Bhagavan is now glorifying Bali. So see, this is the wonderful pastime of Bhagavan. We saw Bhagavan coming and apparently cheating Bali by first coming as a dwarf Vamana boy, asking for 3 paces of land, then taking this infinite proportions, measuring with 2 strides the whole universe, then chastising him for not giving the 3rd stride. All this drama was enacted by Bhagavan, and seeing Bali come out in flying colors and demonstrating to the world his greatness, now Bhagavan gives the most beautiful glorification of his own devotee. He says all of these things happened. His own Guru cursed him, his kinsfolk fled him, his weapons were all snatched away, his wealth was taken away, his empire was removed, he was tied down and bound in cords. Nothing disturbed his resolve. And even I shook him, I chastised him, I spoke in harsh terms to punish him. That also did not shake him. So we can see, therefore, Bhagavan says that he is the one of highest resolve, and therefore you can consider that he has already attained my divine realm. He says, Yeshame prapitaha sthanam dushprapam amarairapi, the one that is extremely difficult even for great yogis, the demigods, the eternal abode of Vaikuntha, you can consider that he has already attained it. So this is the greatest benediction to Bali, and this is the consummation of this whole pastime. So then Bhagavan also says, first he will be Indra in the next Manvantara. So this is also a blessing to him, because he took over the dominion of earth and heaven, and it was taken away by Bhagavan through this pastime. So he wants to give it back to him. So he says in this Manvantara, he will go to the subterranean region called Sutala. We already saw that there are 7 subterranean regions: Atala, Vitala, Sutala, Mahatala, Rasatala, Talatala, Patala. So in that Sutala is the dominion of Bali, and Bhagavan says Sutala will be made into a heavenly region. So he says Vishwakarma, the divine architect, will ensure that Sutala is more opulent than heaven, and Bali will reside there, and he will have the most opulent living there. And not just opulent, but with complete devotion, because he will always have my presence there. He will never feel my absence. He will always feel my presence there. My discus Sudarshana Chakra will always be there to support him there, to protect him there. And there will not be a single negative tendency that will rise, because my presence will always be felt there. And he will live thus a opulent life in Sutala. And then in the next Manvantara, he will be Indra, the Savarni Manvantara. And after that, he will reach the eternal abode to be with me in Vaikuntha. So this is the greatest benediction Bhagavan gives to Bali, and thereby brings out the glory of Bali as a true Mahajan. With this chapter ends. We have one more chapter to conclude what happens to Bali as he enters Sutala, and where does Prahlada go, and how this entire pastime of Vamana avatar, who becomes Trivikrama, this whole glorious avatar. The last chapter of it is the next chapter with which we will conclude this pastime. For now, we end this chapter with Bhagavan glorifying Bali and giving him the highest benediction. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.